Hey everyone, it's me, Tim, and welcome to the Adventure Mind podcast, where we discuss and explore the intersection of outdoor adventure and mental health. Today, we're talking about the mental health benefits of solo hiking and adventure, and I have a lot to say about this topic. I am a big promoter of solo adventure and how that is good for your mental health in so many ways. And we're going to kind of deep dive into about 10 different concepts that we're going to talk about as far as how mental health is benefited from solo hiking and adventure. Let's talk a little bit about the difference between solitude and isolation and why being outdoors alone can actually feel deeply fulfilling. For me, solitude is a healthy kind of bonding experience with myself. I'm able to kind of enjoy my own company and reflect on things and work on things for myself and who I am as a person. Isolation, on the other hand, just means loneliness, and it's not really a good place to be. I feel really isolated when I pull back from friendships and relationships in my life. And it's really not a good thing for me to be isolated. But solitude, on the other hand, very important, very valuable. I definitely get a lot out of being alone with myself in a healthy way, what I would call solitude, not isolation. Being alone outdoors is definitely fulfilling. It can be just an incredible experience, especially if you're new to it. It can create so much personal growth, and you can work on and build the relationship with yourself. I've said this before in other episodes, but you are the only person that you're going to spend your entire life with. So you want to make sure that that's a good relationship and that you actually like spending time with yourself. And that comes with practice and more experience of being alone and being alone out in nature. And whether that be camping or hiking or doing something challenging, whatever that may be, doing it alone and getting comfortable with doing it alone, and actually finding that you enjoy doing things alone. Don't get me wrong, I love hanging out with my friends and doing, fun, adventurous things with friends, but there is something that can't be attained from that. It can only be attained from going alone, from solo adventures. Another concept that I want to discuss is that it gives you space to hear your own thoughts. This can be really scary for some people. I know for me, this is a scary thing. Like, I feel like when I go out and I go camping alone, I have a lot of free time on my own with no distractions. My mind's going to get the better of me, and I'm going to overthink, and I'm going to, just spin things around in my head that aren't healthy, dwelling on things that don't really matter. But what I've found is that when I get out in nature, it actually clears my mind and slows down my thought processes. And it really helps me just think more clearly without the overthinking, the unhealthy overthinking. Solo hiking and camping and adventure and everything removes the outside noise and opinions, which makes it easier to reconnect with yourself. I can definitely relate to this, being able to just be alone with my own thoughts and not experience the, overthinking that I experience on a day-to-day basis throughout regular life. When I go out on an adventure and I'm able to hear my own thoughts clearly and in a calm manner, it removes all that excess noise, and it makes it so much easier to connect with myself and get in touch with what I'm experiencing in life at this point in my life. It gives me the ability to kind of, process my emotions without distraction. And, I work on that kind of stuff with a therapist, but I get so much value and benefit, mental health benefit, from going out in the wilderness alone, going out on an adventure alone. It doesn't have to be a big epic thing. Even just going to the park by myself and sitting and watching the ducks swim by or whatever, or just take a few laps around the local park out, in the sun and the breeze with trees and everything and grass. It's just getting out in nature, being outside by yourself, relaxing. Even if you're doing something strenuous, just like mentally relaxing your brain, it is just so, so valuable. Another thing I want to discuss is building self-trust, basically navigating your decisions alone, whether that be route, pacing, when you're going to take breaks, all this stuff. It builds confidence and self-reliance. This has been such a huge thing for me. I have spent so many campouts alone, and so many motorcycle trips alone, and so many hiking trips alone. And I have built so much self-reliance from that, and so much self-confidence that I never used to have. I was not the most confident person when I started taking adventures alone. It was a long process. It was not easy. It was very scary the first few times that I went camping alone. And, I wasn't sure that it was ever going to be something I got comfortable with, but I wanted to get comfortable with it because I saw that there would be value in that. And I thought, if no one else can go with me on these adventures, like I don't want to miss out because I can't go alone. I really wanted to get comfortable going alone. And I knew from listening to other people that I looked up to that there was value in doing things like that alone and that there could be some personal growth there. And there absolutely was. I gained so much self-confidence and self-reliance from going out alone on adventures and doing scary things in a safe way. I remember my first solo camping trip. I was terrified. Everything sounded so loud outside my tent. I thought for sure, like something bad was going to happen. My spine was just tingling. Like I just felt like I was in so much danger. And when the sun went down, it just got so scary. It almost wasn't enjoyable. But what was enjoyable was the next morning when I woke up and realized, like, wait a minute, I made it. Nothing bad happened. And I had so much confidence from that the next camping trip I did alone was so much more comfortable. Don't get me wrong, it still took a while to get really fully comfortable with it, but the second trip was so much easier than the first trip. And I was able to relax and kind of get in touch with myself and with nature. So, 100%. And solo adventures absolutely build self-trust, self-confidence, and self-reliance, which are all very important skills to have in life, especially as somebody who struggles with mental health issues. Having self-confidence is a practice for me. Like that doesn't come naturally. And I need to continue to exercise those muscles. Like I still have to go out and do stuff alone to maintain that confidence and that self-reliance. I actually really enjoy that aspect of being solo, is planning my route on my own with no compromise, planning my pacing or deciding on my pacing, how fast I want to go, how slow I want to go, when I want to take breaks, when I want to push through, all that stuff, just being able to make my own decisions and for myself and create my own experience without outside influence is so valuable, and it is such a rewarding experience. I so highly recommend it for anybody that's into adventure, anybody that has mental health issues, but honestly, even if you don't have mental health issues and you just like adventure and you just like being out in nature, I think you can benefit so much from doing that stuff alone and, set your own pace and choose when to take breaks and what you're going to eat and where you're going to go and what route you're going to take, and all of it, is just so liberating, and it just builds so much self-confidence, which is so, so important. Next, let's kind of talk about emotional processing without distraction. A solo adventure gives you room to feel emotions fully instead of numbing or avoiding them. This is a big one for me. I have a lot of difficulty processing my emotions. I have a tendency of just kind of stuffing them down and ignoring them, which makes me feel numb. And I kind of just avoid them at all costs, or at least I have in the past. I'm definitely getting better about this. But being a solo out in nature really gives you the ability to process your emotions without any distractions, especially if you're away from your phone. You don't have cell service. You don't have someone there to talk to and distract you. You're able to just really get in touch with where you're at in life emotionally. And it's just so important. And for me, it was such a important tool to develop was to be able to process my emotions, which it came so much easier to me being out in nature alone to kind of process those things. And through that practice, I've gotten better at doing that in my day-to-day life. And now I've gotten better, and I'm working with a therapist on this, but I'm just so much better at processing my emotions in a healthy way. I still enjoy going out into nature to work on that, but I am able to do it in day-to-day life now because of having practiced that while on solo adventures. It is so much better than feeling numb, than avoiding issues and emotions, because those emotions avoided can and will lead to anxiety and depression and other mental health issues, which are just not fun. So I highly recommend that you do some emotional processing without distraction, out in nature by yourself. Next, let's talk about how presence comes naturally. Being outdoors really pulls you into the moment without forcing mindfulness. I've talked about this in another episode as well. Being outside, going on adventures, that is my mindfulness practice. That is where I get in touch with myself and I get really fully in the moment, especially, doing something difficult alone, or even not alone, but just doing something difficult for me. It really puts me in the moment in such an amazing way. I am so in tune with what's going on around me, with the sounds, with the smells, with the sights, the sensation of the ground under my feet. Maybe, take my hand and kind of like drag it across some tall grass or something. Like I really like doing that when I'm out in nature, or touching a bush or a tree or something, or just physically touching the world around me. It puts me so in the moment in a way that I just can't get any other way. Like I have tried meditation and it doesn't work for me because my mind races and it goes crazy. But for some reason, when I'm out in nature, walking, hiking, climbing a mountain, rowing my kayak down the river, it is so easy to be fully present and fully in the moment. And it just comes so much more naturally outside than it does sitting in my condo, in my bedroom, trying to meditate, and my mind just wanders and I just can't focus or be in the moment. My day-to-day life involves a lot of dwelling on the past and a lot of negative self-thinking, and it's just not healthy, and it's a challenge to cope with that. So it is such a relief to get outside and really be present in the moment and not be focused on things from the past, or worrying about the future, or, worrying about things that obstacles in my life, that I don't know how I'm going to tackle. It's so healthy to get that presence, and it's important to have mindfulness practices in your life for better mental health. And it just comes so much more naturally when I'm out in nature, doing something challenging, or even just sitting by a river, and listening to the water flowing, and just kind of like, looking around and taking it all in, and just, being present, being in the moment is such a gift. It's um, such an important skill set to have, and it comes pretty easy when you get out in nature doing something, especially alone. So next, let's talk about freedom from expectations. There is a mental relief that comes from not having to perform, keep up, or meet anyone else's expectations. I can relate to this. In the past, I've gotten much better about it, but there is definitely a sense of relief being alone in nature where there's no other people around and not having to perform. This is something I really had to work on. And in the past, I had always kind of performed for people. I was never really myself around people. And it took some time, alone in nature, doing hard things, to kind of build up the confidence to be myself and not feel like I have to perform for people and put on this certain persona to be a person that I wanted to be or thought I was, or whatever. And I found that by being out in nature alone, I really got to know myself much better. And I got to really like some of the things that I learned about myself. Not all of them, but I work on the things that I don't like, that I'm not crazy about. But not having to perform for people out in nature, and realize that, like, actually there's a lot of value in not performing and just being yourself and just being 100% authentic. It took practice out in nature, but I was able to take that skill and bring it into everyday life. And now I feel like I don't have to be so performative, and I can just kind of be myself no matter who I'm around. I know that, like, I like me, and that's all that really matters. I try to be a good person and do the right thing, but I don't put on a show for people anymore. Not like I used to, especially when I was drinking. I tried to be this confident person that I just wasn't at the time. And I think in retrospect, in the past, I would have benefited from just being myself, and being the awkward, shy guy that didn't have much to say, and accept that and embrace that and work on maybe just getting better about being less quiet and less shy, and just being more authentic. And it is just so liberating um, to not have to pretend to be somebody you're not. And even like when I was much younger, I had different personas for different groups of people. Like I was one person at school, I was another person at home, I was another person, at work. And it's just so hard to keep up with all of that. And it was just exhausting. When I got used to being myself and not having to put on a show for people, it was just so liberating and so incredible. So there's that. And then, not having to meet other people's expectations when you're alone in nature, just the freedom to just completely be yourself and just let it all hang out, and let your hair down, so to speak, and just enjoy that freedom from expectation. It's so incredible. Next, let's talk about facing fear in a healthy way, and how manageable fear on solo trips can help you understand and regulate anxiety. I kind of touched on this about my first camping experience. My first solo camping experience was scary, but I faced it head on and I got through it. And like I said, the next morning was incredible. Like I realized I survived. I kind of had this calm sense that like nothing bad was going to happen. Once the sun came up, things weren't as scary. And then, the noises weren't as loud as they were when I was laying in my tent trying to fall asleep, terrified. But facing that fear in a healthy way, it really has helped me cope with and deal with my anxiety, managing that. And, I try to get out in nature and do something scary as frequently as I can because I know that there's value in that. And that is like a muscle that I want to exercise and I want to get better at dealing with my anxiety and dealing with fear. So I push myself to do scary things, climbing a mountain, with steep drop offs that like I'm afraid of heights. So I try to do things that push that comfort zone, and get myself outside of that comfort zone of like, where am I starting to get afraid of being up too high? Okay, let me keep pushing and be safe about it, but like, let me push through and make it to the top anyway. It doesn't always work out. There's one hike in particular that I've attempted several times called Flatiron in the Superstition Mountains. I've tried several times to make it to the top. And once you get to like that last little section, it's a really steep climb. And it's a climb, not a hike. Like you have to climb up rocks to get to the top part. And it's just terrifying. And by the time I get to that point, I'm so worn out from all the fear that I've already overcame that I just can't quite push through. And I keep trying anyway. And I'm going to try again soon because I really want to accomplish that. I want to get to the top of that mountain and conquer that fear. But it's intense. And it takes practice sometimes to overcome that stuff, but it is so valuable, not only to just conquer that fear and have that to feel proud of, but just the practice of conquering fear. Fear is very similar to anxiety for me. My anxiety puts me in a state of absolute terror. When I have, panic attacks or whatever, it is just so terrifying, so, so scary. But having done scary things outside, like hike across the Grand Canyon, which was terrifying for me, there were parts of that trail where, you got a trail's width and then a drop off on both sides, and it's just terrifying. But having conquered that, it makes dealing with my panic attacks so much easier. Not entirely easy. I wouldn't call it easy, but definitely easier. And I'm able to cope with it a lot better and kind of, have that practice in my back pocket, and I'm able to kind of rely on that. And, it really just helps with my anxiety and my panic attacks. I think anybody that deals with panic attacks, like if you deal with that and you deal with that fear in the moment, I think doing scary things outside is going to really help you with that. It's definitely helped me. Next, let's talk about how solo adventure strengthens identity. Solo adventures help you remember who you are when no one is watching. This is so relevant for me. I think I've kind of touched on this a little bit already in this episode. But solo adventure really gets you in touch with who you are as a person. When no one's watching, when there's nobody to perform for, you're just yourself, you're just alone, and you're able to really get to know yourself and work on that relationship because, like I said, you're the only person you're going to spend your whole life with. And it is so important to work on that relationship and make sure that you enjoy being around the person that you are. And, being alone, being self-reliant, doing everything for yourself, navigating, finding a campsite, setting up camp, cooking your dinner, planning things out before the trip, whatever it happens to be, all these different skills that you're using along the way really strengthens your identity and it builds a confidence that you take out into the real world. For me, it was so important for me to go out and do these things when I was first starting my mental health journey of like getting better 15 years ago when I got sober and started working on myself and becoming a better person and working on my anxiety and my depression and everything. In that moment of beginning that journey, it was so important for me to get out and do difficult things out in nature and grow and learn about the person that I am and what I'm capable of and that like I can do anything I set my mind to. Knowing that I had become that person and was becoming that person was it was such a critical part of my journey, becoming who I am today. And just self-confidence, knowing that like you can handle things when things go wrong, you can handle it and you will handle it. That kind of self-reliance is so powerful and so worth building up. If you don't have that, I would just so highly recommend that you continue pushing to do hard things outside in nature and just build up that reliance, that self-reliance. It's such a great way to strengthen your identity and fortify the person that you want to be by doing things that are difficult. And next, let's talk about the reset that comes from quiet. Silence and natural sounds calm the mind in a way that constant noise definitely can't. Yeah, this is a big one. I love a mental reset that comes from the quiet of being alone out in nature, listening to the wind blow through the trees, maybe listening to a babbling brook or a river or waterfall. Maybe you're by a lake and the waves are kind of crashing on the rocks of the beach or something. There is such a reset that comes from that. It just regulates your nervous system and you just kind of get back to square one. It kind of releases some tension and releases some of the anxiety that you carry with you. And it only comes from being in the quiet and enjoying the sounds of nature, the natural sounds in a calm way. It does wonders for the mind and the nervous system for me. I think, I try to go out at least once or twice a week out into nature, even if nature could be as simple as just going to a local park and being in nature and just moving my body a little bit, just walking around. There's such a reset that comes from that. And I try to do that at least a couple times a week if I can. And every couple of weekends, I'll do a bigger, big hike day kind of thing, day hike. Now that I'm working full time, I'm working 6 to 7 days a week. So it's hard to fit that in all the time, but I do make it a priority. When I do have the time, I force myself to get out there and do that and get that mental reset so I can just be healthier and more relaxed in my day-to-day life. That reset is so important, and I try to get it as often as I can. Like I said, at least a couple times a week on the evenings, hiking or whatever, short hikes around town. And then once in a while when I can, I do a bigger hike. And the final thing I want to talk about is making solo adventure safe and accessible. Basically, I just want to give you some reassurance that you can start small. It doesn't have to be big and epic, as long as you stay prepared and you respect your comfort levels while pushing them a little bit. I think you're going to be in really good shape. It is so important to start small. If you've never been camping alone, maybe go someplace close to home. Don't backpack for 20 miles to get to a campsite and be so remote that you can't bail if you decide that it's not working or it's, too scary or whatever. And so just start small and build up to bigger things. For me, I didn't take my first solo motorcycle trip back and forth across the country. My first solo trip was something local. My first motorcycle solo trip was local. And I kind of built up to taking a camping trip, an overnight trip to Joshua Tree from Arizona. That's a good solid weekend ride and camp out, place to camp. And then I built up to multi-day trips, maybe riding up to Utah and hitting, Zion and Bryce and Capitol Reef and just ride around and camp a couple nights, that kind of thing. And I worked up to taking a 10-month solo motorcycle trip, camping most of the way, alone most of the time. I built up to that, and you can build up to that too. And the possibilities are endless once you get comfortable doing things alone. Because for me, one of the biggest factors of, reasons that I wasn't doing things was not having someone to go with. And realizing that I want to do big things, that, not everybody can take 10 months off to go travel around the United States on a motorcycle. That's not something that everybody can do. It was very difficult to find somebody to go with you. I found people along the way to spend time with, but overall that trip happened because I got comfortable doing things alone. The possibilities are endless, and it's worth getting comfortable with that and seeing what those possibilities could be. So hiking isn't about being brave. It's about giving your mind space to breathe. There is some bravery involved. It doesn't have to be scary. There really isn't much to be afraid of. As long as you're doing things safely and you're prepared and you have everything you need to be safe and you do the right thing with your food if you're in bear country, there really isn't much to be scared of. From my experience, my first few campouts were very scary. But looking back at it, there's really nothing to be afraid of. And when you push through it and you do it a couple times and you have a baseline of well, I've heard that noise before and nothing bad happened. Or, I've been camping in this area before. I know there's bears, but I didn't have any issues last time, so I probably won't have any this time. That kind of thing. It gives you so much confidence. But what's really important about solo time outdoors and doing difficult things alone is that it gives your mind the space to breathe. It gives you a chance to kind of process your emotions, get in touch with yourself, learn about yourself. I mean, you can just learn so many things about yourself doing hard things alone outside. I've learned so much about myself through camping and travel and anything adventurous that I've done alone. I always learn something about myself. I learn something new that I'm capable of that I didn't know. Or I learn so many different things about myself by spending time with myself. And I think it is so important to do that and chase that. Anyways, that is it for today. So I hope you kind of resonated with some of this stuff. We covered a lot of bases here. We talked about why solo doesn't mean lonely. We talked about having space to hear your own thoughts. We talked about building self-trust, emotional processing without distraction. We talked about how presence comes naturally, freedom from expectations and not having to be performative, facing fear in a healthy way. Very important. Definitely push those comfort zones if you can. Do it safely and in a healthy way, but definitely push those fears. Also, we talked about strengthening your identity and, learning who you are when no one's watching. And we talked about that reset that comes from the quiet of nature. So important. It's something I value very much and try to chase a couple times a week if I can. And we also talked about how solo adventures can be safe and accessible. So hopefully you resonated with some of this episode. It was really awesome to spend some time with you today. Thank you for listening. If you're listening on a podcast channel, Spotify, Apple Music, or whatever you happen to be listening, if you could leave a review or a rating, that would be awesome. I would really appreciate it if you found value in this. Maybe share it with a friend, someone that you think might relate to it. And that is it for today. So thank you so much for listening or watching if you're over on YouTube. And I will talk to you next week. Bye.